Welcome to The Jewish Lens, a podcast to discuss anything and everything from a Jewish perspective. Now, please help me welcome the man who controls the media, your host, Jonathan Rosen.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of The Jewish Lens. I'm Jonathan Rosen, and today I am thrilled to welcome someone who's a lawyer, an award-winning author of several books, including her latest, Murder Without a Duck. Please help me welcome Claudia Long. Claudia, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Jonathan.
Well, we have a lot to cover, but I always like to start by going back. Where did you grow up, and what was your family life like, in particular with regard to Judaism?
Well, that's, it's getting right to the meat of it right off the bat, aren't we?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, growing up, I had you want to go into my checkered past? Here we go, Although I was born in the United States, I grew up in Mexico City.
Did you? When, and where?
Well, this will give it all away, won't it? But 1960 to 1966. I just turned 70 2 weeks ago. So you're asking me to play the Wayback Machine very far, okay?
I lived in Mexico as a kid for a couple of years too, because my dad was Mexican, so we did live there for a couple of years.
Really? Where in Mexico City?
We lived in Mexico City. I'm not going to remember exactly where, but we did live in Mexico City. I still have a lot of family in Mexico and a lot of Mexican relatives.
That's, it's so rare. Usually when I start with that, people are like, what? I don't understand, but you do. And yeah, no, we lived in a lot of different places in Mexico City, but
well, what way did you go there?
Well, it's kind of a long story, but my dad, the short form of it is my dad went to medical school at the Universidad Autónoma, but this actually ties in quite a bit to the Jewish lens in the sense that after the war, when he came back on the GI Bill, he finished and got a doctorate of optometry because he couldn't quite face the whole medical school thing. And by the time he decided that he really wanted to do that, there were quotas and he was older and neither of those things worked in his favor. And so we moved to Mexico City and my father went to medical school there. My mother was.
You were already a kid. I mean, you were a kid when you moved to Mexico.
Yes, I was just before I turned 5, like a couple of weeks before I turned 5. And my mother was the only survivor of her family in the Holocaust. And she had made her way to the United States and had met my dad, and they'd married. And so upheaval was just part of their lives. It wasn't anything that they were unfamiliar with. So they packed us all up and went to Mexico City. And we grew up there and moved back to the States when I was 11. And so that's where I grew up. And in terms of Judaism, there are many different reactions to being a Holocaust survivor. Some people speak of nothing. Some people speak of it constantly. My mother was a speak of nothing type of person. And so we knew we were Jewish, but we never could say the word Jewish. It was kind of a topic that was never broached in our house. And so growing up in Mexico, you know how it is. Your friends go to Catholic church, you go with them, you learn all the holidays. I can say the Mass in Latin, for heaven's sakes, because I'm that old. And, and yet we always knew that we were Jewish. And so my sister, who's a year and a half older than I am, it was totally aware of all of this. And I was a total little fool who just kind of followed around and did whatever everybody else was doing. So that was that's where I grew up, and that was the Jewish aspect of it.
So there was like a wariness, I guess, with your family, with your parents about being Jewish, about like a fear almost, or no?
Well, when they kill everybody in your family because you are Jewish, that does engender a little bit of fear. I mean, we all like to think as if we know what we would do.
Right.
But actually, I think given the broad range of reactions that we're really only discovering now, in the sense that, how do I put this? There was so much kept inside that, with all the novels being written by the daughters and granddaughters, or grandsons, of course, of survivors, we're learning all the different permutations. Society wants one thing. They want one kind of Jew.
Right.
And if not dead, they want, if not Anne Frank, they want a hero. That's not really what everybody is.
So so in Mexico, you really weren't in like a Jewish neighborhood or anything like that at all.
Oh gosh, no, we lived in Mexico as we weren't in an expat neighborhood. We weren't in anything like that. We were just living there as part of society.
And what about when you moved to California? So you moved to
Um,
California from Mexico directly. You went
no,
to,
no, no,
oh,
no, no. Moved to New York,
oh,
and we lived in New York. I graduated high school in New York, went to college,
which
and
area in
then,
New York?
pardon me?
Which area in New York?
We lived in at Grasslands Hospital, and where my father was doing his residency. And then we moved out when he finished and lived in a different part of northern Westchester. And then I went to college, and then I went to law school. And then the day after graduation from law school, I moved to California.
I know you can't tell from the accent, but I'm from New York. But so,
So we have a lot more in common than you
yes,
think.
you do
Mexico
a lot, I
City,
see.
and yeah.
So let's go into the writing aspect of it. So what was, just curious, like what were some of your favorite books growing up?
Well, I read like a maniac. And so I loved Sarah Crew and What Happened at Miss Minchin. I loved, she was, the little orphan girl from India. That was a fascinating book to me. I loved all the Famous Five mysteries. Read them in French, oddly enough, Club de
Oh,
Cinq.
wow.
And so, because part of my schooling was at the French Lycée in Mexico, so,
Wow.
reading in French a lot of times. Um, so when I came to the States, my parents had this view that they had a vast library of books.
Hmm.
And sorry, terrible allergies in springtime here in the valley. Everything's in bloom, and it's everything is just driving me crazy. So you'll have to forgive that. But my parents had this huge collection of books, and they were completely of the point of view that anything you could read, you could read. And so there was no limitation on what we read. And I happened, you're not going to believe this, to stumble across Henry Miller's body of work, Sexus, Nexus, and Plexus. Oh my God. I'm 11 years old going,
Wow.
oh, this is interesting, it's a lot better than Trixie Belden, and so, I read really, really widely. And once we were in New York, first thing we did was get library cards.
Uh-huh.
And so I read constantly. And then in college, sorry, I discovered Gabriel Garcia Marquez and 100 Years of Solitude.
Mhm.
My mother had read it. She said, you have to read this. Okay. So it had just come out when she read it. And she was like, you have to read this. And that became almost my Bible. I probably have read it in both English and Spanish because I still read bilingually, obviously,
There you
probably
go.
you do,
Okay, that's
you know. Um, I've read that probably 10 times. And there would be times when I'd have the English translation, which is brilliant, by the way. I think it was
mhm.
an absolutely brilliant translation. Upstairs by my, next to my bed, and the Spanish version down in the den. And if I left off, I would just pick up where I had left off because the translation is so brilliant. And I read that and read that and read that. And so I would say of all the books, that was, it was such an eye opener because I read it and I thought, you can write stories like that?
Mhm.
That it's, it,
I think you're going to put me to shame because I read a lot as a kid too, but we had different experience. When I was in Mexico, the way I learned to speak Spanish was by reading Spider-Man comic books. So it was a little bit different.
You're a little younger than I am.
Did you write a lot as a kid as well?
No, I did not write as a kid. I always felt frustrated that what I wanted that was in my head, I could not make come out my hand. It was the images that I would write would be flat compared to my imagination. And I found that very, very frustrating. And so I didn't write. And, high school and college, I wrote poetry, but everybody does, right? And I mean, it was ghastly. I mean, totally cringeworthy, the worst stuff you've ever read in your life. But that's when I did write. I didn't start actually writing until my first child came along. My daughter, I was 31. And so I wrote a kind of a cheesy romance novel. And you got to remember, this is all before the internet, before cell phones, before anything like that. Okay. So I typed it up and I sent it to a publisher. Again, I am always the person who has no clue. Okay. Yeah, I'm a lawyer. I was, representing Bank of America. I was doing all this stuff. But in my real life, clueless. Okay, you have to get that. So I sent off the manuscript to a publisher. I thought, okay, well, here I have this. I've written this. It's cool. And I got a phone call from one of the editors who said, oh, we liked it very much. We can't publish it, but do you write Regency? Regency romances. And I said, no. Not really, not realizing what an incredible opportunity this was.
Yes, you always say yes. Yeah.
I was like, no. So that was when I started writing.
That's when so in the 30s you first started writing. Just
Yeah.
curious, so what kind of law did you do? Or do
Right now I'm practicing for the past 24 years or whatever. I've been practicing as a mediator and arbitrator in employment discrimination lawsuits and in complex business dissolutions and of course real estate because that's the bread and butter of practically everybody, but only as a neutral, as a mediator or an arbitrator. And before that, I was a litigator, started my practice with Bank of America, doing, all the various banking law that one does, and then did some construction defect litigation, started my own practice.
Nice.
You know,
So you did not start taking writing seriously until your 30s.
yeah, no.
Oh, not even then.
I didn't start taking writing seriously till my 50s.
Really?
But I wrote, like I said, some romances, and then in my 40s, I wrote some very, 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 add another very to that one, steamy romance, and sold under a pen name, of course, because again, this Bank
Right.
of America lawyer, and um, with a couple of kids and active in society. And so I wrote a lot of really, really steamy romance, and all of that was published by a very large steamy romance publisher out of Canada, and I still get royalties. Because you know what, my friend, that stuff sells.
Yes, that's what I hear. I hear that sells very well.
Yeah.
Went to the
And then when I was in my early 50s, I decided I wanted to write a real book. And so that's when I started taking it seriously. I took some classes, UC Berkeley Extension, and started writing and wrote some real book and started writing my first real book.
So what was the first thing you had published as when you started going that route?
Josefina's Sin, and it's historical fiction. It takes place in the colonial era of Mexico. It's 1690. It intersects with Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz, and it was a historical fiction. It was published by Simon and Schuster, and it came out in 2011. Yeah.
So you have this whole series based on like Mexican Jews. So they're right.
Right. Yeah. Yes. The crypto Jews of Mexico. It was a fascination for me. That was when I I, how do I first started connecting with who I really am. And my mother, when I was always in my 20s or 30s, handed me a book called Los Marranos.
Right.
And it's about the people converted at the point of the sword in Spain in the 1480s, 90s, etc., before the expulsion. And she said, "This is who we are." And again, like I say, I am like the most spectacularly clueless person. I'm like, okay. And so I read it. Nothing connected until much later.
That's intense. No, there's such a vibrant Jewish community in Mexico that like I said, all my family's there. So, that's how the series came about. So you won awards for that, right? How did that all come about? That you got
Well,
awards that you got recognized for your work with writing about that.
Well, it was really amazing. I wrote 3 books in that series. Josefina Sin, The Duel for Consuelo, which directly addresses the crypto Jews, the secret Jews of Mexico, and then Chains of Silver, which has also an overlay of women in the mining industry, silver mining industry in Zacatecas. And uh, at that point,
Your
it
Spanish is
was
great, by the way.
well, like you. I grew up there. It's
Yours is better than mine. Yes.
But I hear a California accent that I cannot get rid of.
Same
If
thing
we
with
said more,
New York.
more than 1 or 2 words,
Mhm.
it's anyway. But then again, I've been here for over 60 years, so, in the States. So anyway, those the Latino Book Awards have various categories. I am not Mexican,
Mhm.
okay? I am, but my mother's family, and this is a real unusual thing, her mother's side came from Spain and Portugal to Poland during the expulsion. Now, most Jews went to either Morocco and North Africa, or they went to Amsterdam, and some went to Italy and various things. But her family, contrarians as we all are, went to Poland, where the king of Poland said, if you convert, I will give you land.
Hmm.
And if you don't convert, I will welcome you as artisans working in gold and silver and things like that. And that was unusual back in 1492, right?
Right.
And so of my mother's history, that was what was handed down, that they went to Poland. And that's why her mother's name was Francesca, which is my sister's name, and her name was Maria. And I mean, the Jews in Poland were not naming their children Francesca and Maria, except the Sephardics who were running a different line. So that was kind of a little bit what
So
interested
how
me.
did they come to you? I mean, so you said you're not Mexican, but how did they come to you? How were you recognized? Just because of the subject matter for these awards?
Yes, and because even though I'm not Mexican, I put on you have to fill out an app, it's
Right.
kind of like you come to them, they come to you, your books are submitted, you fill out an application, and I checked Sephardic. And I guess they looked at that and said, what's Sephardic? And, it's like, oh, yeah, descendants from Spain and Portugal. I guess that works. And
That
then,
qualifies, right?
yeah, and it should. And so that was where, that's how that I was able to, because the subject matter, yes, but there's a lot of questions about things like that. So, yeah.
How were you notified when you won?
Um, Golly, I can't remember.
What was that feeling like that you get an award for this?
Yeah, I don't remember how it came out. I think since that was like in like 2015 or so, probably an email. I just don't remember. I still have the little medal, but and then I went on to write other books, and so I kind of left that in my past.
And one of these books was optioned for a film?
Yes, and that's 9/10 of the law. That is, if I'm honest, probably the best book I've ever written.
Mhm.
I mean, I'm here to talk about Murder Without a Duck and try to, pump it up and everything, which is it's a really funny book. It's a hilarious book, Murder Without a Duck. But
So it was the best book you've written until Murder, without a doubt.
well, yeah, but
So,
Nine Tenths is in a class by itself because um when my mom died, a year later on her yahrzeit, my dad sat down with me and said, I want to tell you Mom's story. And you're the writer. At that point, I had all these other books, you know. She said, I want you to write her story. And I said, I can't write her story. That's her story, but I can write a story of her. And so Nine Tenths of the Law came about because my father told me what actually happened to my mother in the war. And okay, so this is New Year's Day 2015, okay? So this is all old,
mhm.
and all the pieces started to fit together. It was Things started to fall into place. Now, meanwhile, before that, I had I'd written the stories of the crypto Jews, and tell me if I'm going on too long because I can
No,
talk
not at
about that
all, please.
forever.
Sure.
Um, I was discovering who I was
Mhm.
with the crypto Jews and with the understanding that perhaps we were modern crypto Jews, people who were traumatized to the point where we were afraid to say who we actually were. And so I got it in my head that I wanted to know. And so my office was right across from the temple in my town. And I wasn't living up here in Calistoga yet. I was still living in San Francisco suburbs. And I went up there and I started going to services. And the rabbi was Argentinian. And when he spoke Hebrew, I heard things I must have heard as a child
Mhm.
because of his accent. He spoke Ladino, he spoke Hebrew with a Argentinian accent. So I must have heard that as a child with my mother somewhere. And I said, I want to learn. And so I became an adult bat mitzvah at 53
Really?
and
That's when you first did?
learned
Oh.
Hebrew. Yeah, learned prayer Hebrew and learned, and it was to me, it was a revelation. And my mom by then was quite ill. She had Alzheimer's and didn't really know what was going on. But my dad, it's like, you sound like your mother speaking Hebrew. And I was thinking, how would he know? And of course he knew because their relationship was different from the relationship that they had with their children, in
Hmm.
which nothing was spoken. But he'd met her, they were very young. And so it was right after he was out of the army and she was a refugee here. So, it's like for them, it was real. And so when I wrote Nine Tenths of the Law, I wrote about two 60-year-old daughters of a Holocaust survivor. It's a mystery. There's a stolen menorah. There's a bad guy. They chase him through New York City and everything. But interwoven are the stories of their mother.
Mhm.
So my mother's stories are interwoven as the stories of the two protagonists' mother. So
Yeah, I've heard a lot of similar, stories like yours, where kids, grew up and only much later in life found out things about their parents who were Holocaust survivors that it was never shared with them growing up, which is, fascinating to me. So I mean, you write, first of all, tell me about the bat mitzvah. What was it like for you now getting it in your 50s, finally doing it?
there was a cohort, it was a B'nai Mitzvah class, and a lot of adults turned to this. And
What made you
I was,
decide to do it then? I mean, just because you wanted to have it done because you never did it? Is that
no, because in my era, girls didn't do it anyway, so it didn't
right?
matter.
Okay.
Um, I wanted to learn who I was.
Mhm.
And as I said to my father, he said, why are you doing this? And I said, because if so many people died for it, it must be important. And so I wanted to learn. And so that was the best way to learn, right? You join a class, and if you're kind of a perpetual student, you join classes, right? And they had a B'nai Mitzvah cohort starting, and I joined that and learned prayer Hebrew and learned about, they had the Judaism 101 and all of the things that I did not know. It was, um, I knew cultural things. I mean, even in Mexico and even later on in the States, think of it this way. At some point in the fall, my father would put honey on bread and break it up and give it to all of us and say, have a sweet year. But we never knew why or when this was going to happen. And there were things like that we didn't know. Every on Friday nights, I didn't even realize it. My parents always had candles at the table and had a glass of wine, which they didn't normally do, you know, and we didn't know why. And then probably my sister knew because, like I said, I was an idiot. And then when we came to the States, the first spring that we were in the United States in New York,
Mhm.
when I guess I turned 12 by then, my father came home with a box of matzah.
Mm.
And I said, "What's that?" And he said, "Oh, here, it's very delicious." And gave it to us. He said, "But don't eat it outside.
Mm.
Don't be seen, you know?" And so it was it was something that was this is how I grew up. So
Right.
becoming a bat mitzvah, when I told my father that why, he was very moved. But and when I started like practicing, saying, "Okay, this is what I've learned and everything," and that's what he said, "You sound like your mother."
It's amazing too that even though he tried hiding a lot of it and hiding from, I guess the neighborhood society and keeping things from you, he still had it in his mind that we want to do we want to do these things. We want to, we're doing Shabbat, we're doing Passover, uh,
Right.
that he still passed it on. That's something to me.
And
So,
when I was born in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, and that's where his family was living. And so I went to Beth Zion Nursery School. Didn't know it was Jewish, but there you have it. Um, uh, in other words, it wasn't hidden then, but it's only when we left and went to Mexico that it became hidden. But I was only 4, so I didn't have any memory of this.
so just goes into one of my next questions, actually, too. A lot of this stuff that you're asking is you write, and I'm seeing why a little bit. You write a lot of historical fiction. So I just curious, what is it about the genre that appeals to you?
The research.
Hmm.
Um, you're discovering a world, and historical fiction is written in between the facts. I mean, you can look up fact one and fact two, but who said what in between those facts is not there, and that's the part that you get to invent. And writing, for instance, about Sor Juana, she was my kind of hero. I was in love with her. I had a ridiculous crush on Sor Juana in college, which is ridiculous because she lived in the 14, she lived in 1690 and I was in 1970, but what do there you have it, And so you imagine the interactions and the talk and the clothing. And for some reason, I loved learning about that stuff and then creating a world that was grounded in history, but was full full of things, as opposed to the emptiness of just facts.
Well, I mean, I just from your life, I could see why you like learning about historical fictions. Just like, you're researching, you have many gaps in your own life that you had. So growing up,
Yeah, yeah.
do you have a favorite era of history? Just curious.
No, no,
No.
I actually do not. I love the colonial Mexico time period, but that was because of Sor Juana. And then Nine Tenths of the Law and the one that comes after it, Our Lion Kin, are all contemporary with flashbacks and to immigrant and World War II and things like that. So no, I really don't think I have a favorite. Also can't say that I still have never written a Regency romance, I have to tell you.
Get on that this year. So,
Right.
so when you first wrote me, and I could say you talked to me about how October 7th impacted you, how it affected you,
Yeah.
and especially, I could see that, especially, I think it impacted, you know, a majority of Jews, at least I would say, 99% of them, if not more, but and impacted, but especially, I think, you're coming from the daughter of Holocaust survivors. So how did you first hear about it? I'm just curious. How did you first hear about it that day?
I was, I'm in California, so the time difference.
Hmm.
Okay. And it was Sunday morning, so I was sleeping in a little bit, and I got a text from a friend, um, who's not Jewish, she's Scottish. And but she is what I would say a true ally, not a temporary ally, but somebody who's always been there. Um, and she sent me a text that said, "It's horrific. It's horrific." And I'm like, "What?" I'm asleep. Okay. So I got up and I went on my computer and was sick from what I was seeing and reading. And like everybody was, all of us were, you were, I was, like you say, 99.9% of Jews and humans. I mean, no, it's not true, not humans,
I wouldn't say
but
that's true.
allies,
Yeah, but
allies, everybody. Well, actually, in the beginning, people were just stunned that this was happening. And
first
then, of
day,
course,
I think that was it.
yeah, yeah. And then, of course, there was the divergence of
Mhm.
of reactions that compelled my son into he's into the ADL, and you know, we all had ways of coping. Um, and to me, there were elements of the worst things I had imagined my mother going through, because she did everything you can imagine. A beautiful girl
Right.
who was 13 when Hitler marched into Poland, and 18 when the war ended, her entire teenage years.
Mhm.
Everything you can imagine, she did go through. So to me, it was like a newsreel of these horrors. And it was incomprehensible. And of course, then the world reaction was even more incomprehensible.
Mhm.
But, you know,
So, okay, so yeah, I just, curious. I mean, how are things where you live?
um, there's two parts of where I live. Okay. I live in this tiny town where it's 50% Latino, and they mostly are concerned with, um, our town is concerned with hospitality and
Hmm.
wine. Okay. So up here, there might be 20 Jews.
Well,
I've met 8 of them, you know. And so it's kind of like, oh yes, we heard about that. That's terrible. There's not anti-Semitism. I saw only one sticker on a lamppost and I took it down, you know. But other than that, there's really not much involvement in that part of
that's
the
good. You don't feel it
community.
where you are. You don't feel like what?
Not in my little town,
Right.
but we are not far from Berkeley.
Hmm.
Okay. And city council in Oakland. And,
Right. Yeah.
so where it is, there's massive anti-Semitism. And okay, in Berkeley, there's always been, okay, it's the, it's not the skinhead anti-Semitism,
No, it's not that. It's not that at
it's
all.
the other one.
Yeah, it's
You
coming from
know,
the other side.
the
Yes.
skinhead anti-Semitism, we're kind of like, yeah, yeah, we know about that.
Right. Right.
Yeah, yeah, go do your march. Yeah, yeah, we hate you. You hate us. Good. Bye. You
Hmm.
know, although that's come back now on the other side. Anyway,
Yeah.
but it's the anti-Semitism of the left that is such a betrayal.
Yeah.
And yet
I agree.
it's always been there. I mean, it's always been at Berkeley.
Yes, but it was like a little bit hidden. Now everyone feels free to like,
Oh,
ex
they're proud of it. They're
right.
proud of it,
Hmm.
you know. And so at that point in my writing, which is very, very peripheral to the horrors, but I had just finished book 3 of the Zara and Lily series, okay? And I was about to send it out to my publisher. I wanted to polish up a few little things, just make a few words better. And they're in Israel. My publishers for those books were in Israel. I mean, everything ground to a halt, right? I
Right.
was so stunned. Everybody was stunned. Anyway, so normally I write in November for Nana with NaNoWriMo, and I was like, uh, I'm not writing this year. I've just finished another book and one thing and the other. And as things got worse and worse through October,
Hmm.
and the virulence of the anti-Semitism and the horrors and the hostages and the beginning of the war and everything. It's like, I have to write. But what am I going to write? I can't write about this. I haven't processed it. Writing is at post-processing for me. And I thought, I want to write something with Jewish joy. I want to write something where we're more than this. We're more than just the Holocaust and now October 7. These are our brands, that we're always,
You're
being
very similar.
scarred with. And so I live in this little town, and it's all they do is worry about the hotels and the wine and everything. And I thought, I'm going to do a mystery there. And, I look back on it, and all my protagonists have been Jewish women, whether they're crypto Jews or they're openly Jewish or they know they're Jewish. They've always been. And even, you will laugh, even in some of my smutty romances, about half of those books, my main character is Jewish because they just are. I can't help it. It's not like, okay, I'm going to write about Jewish women. No, it just are. So in Murder Without a Duck, Sal Devine, she's born Salvia Grossman.
By the way, I love the title. I do love the title. Yes.
So
Yes. Tell me about it.
she's Jewish,
Right.
and she's in this little town, kind of like me, where there's like 7 of them.
By the way, for your other work before, and I'm glad because I think it's important to have Jewish representation in erotica. So but no, so let's talk about Murder Without a Duck. Like I said, I love the title, and as we know, it's the best thing you've ever written. So we'll cut that. So
It's certainly the funniest thing I've ever written.
so tell me about it. Tell me about the storyline a little bit and how this came to you to write.
Well, like I said, I'm in this little town, and there's the farmers market across the street, and there's an actual monastery with nuns, not monks, in it, in our town. They're Russian Orthodox, but they wear the full habit. And there's these the town of Calistoga was allegedly named by the founder, Sam Brannan, who was too drunk and wanted to name it Saratoga after the Saratoga in New York, where the hot springs are, because we have hot springs here. And so we have geysers and hot springs and all kinds of things. You can't have a well, because if you dig a well, you're going to have anyway. So, but he was too drunk, so he ended up naming it Calistoga, California, instead of Saratoga, California. Okay, that's the myth about the name of the town, right? So in my town of Simpato, 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 California, it was named by the founder, who was too drunk to write out the entire word simpatico. So he just wrote Simpato. But the locals, of course, call it Sin Pato,
Right.
which is without a duck, which you and I both know. But so the story itself, it's the town of Simpato, but they call it Simpato, and everything is named like after ducks. Like the grocery store is the duck shop. The
That's great.
I mean, there are so many bad duck puns that I have to like apologize whenever I sell a book, It's like, I'm so sorry there's so many bad duck jokes in here. And so, and the high school is the kids call it, well, they changed the first letter, but the locals call it No Duck High, Simpato High, No Duck High. The kids use a different first letter for the duck,
Yes.
And the little lake is the Duckless Pond, they call it. It's Simpato Lake, but locals call it the Duckless Pond.
I love this town. Okay.
So it's like, I just was like reveling in how fun this was. And my protagonist is Jewish, and it comes up a couple of times, but it's not the focus of the story. It's kind of like people, just regular people who happen to be of a particular
Not a
religion, but
Jewish story. The protagonist just happens to be Jewish.
and it's almost, there's a little bit more than just happens, but yeah,
Right,
it just, in other words, we're entitled to stories too. You know that?
right,
We're
absolutely.
entitled to romance, we're entitled to smut, we're entitled to mysteries.
Agreed.
And it's, and so that was the inspiration for writing it. And, you know,
What's the basic premise? What's the basic premise of the story?
okay, the basic premise of it is that Sal Devine is just divorced from Saul Devine, and she moved to this little town of Simpato where her family had a summer house. Okay, and she's also been temporarily suspended from the practice of law because of the things that her husband pulled off as her law partner as well as her life partner. And so she's been suspended, so she can't practice. So she goes kind of to lick her wounds, leaves San Francisco. And while she's there, the gossip columnist for the local paper, which is a weekly called The Quack. Uh, anyway, the gossip columnist is murdered. Okay. And she discovers the body. And it turns out that she's the gossip columnist. It goes back to a secret from back in the, 10 years earlier when at the high school there had been a scandal and two of the boys had to leave town, and one boy comes back and is the librarian at the town, but the other one ends up in jail. And it turns out that the gossip columnist knows that the boy who didn't come back had murdered his father. And so
Mhm.
she's been like bleeding him dry of his land, interest in his land um, for 10 years. And when he gets out of jail, he comes back, and that's the scandal. That's the premise. But meanwhile, there's just so much silliness going on. So
Oh,
there's like a
that title, I could see it. So, like I said, I love that title. When you sent it to me, I was like loving it right away. Murder Without a Duck. So and okay. So now here comes the important question. Then, what are you working on next?
book two.
Is this going to be a sequel to this
Yes, and its working
series?
title is Truck a Duck.
It's great. Okay.
And because in our little town here, there was a little dust up in the city council, and finally they passed this new thing about food trucks, where they could be and where they could park.
Hmm.
So I took that as the premise, and I have these food trucks, and they're having, they get to park some of them downtown, and some of the restaurant owners don't like that because they think that it's going to take away from the shishi atmosphere where all the dinners are overpriced and everything. And the people who run the food trucks are saying, we live here. We want to be able to go out. We can't afford your restaurants. We want to be able to go downtown and have some fun. So there's like friction, and somebody, a, a food truck owner dies and they don't know why. And then the health inspector, don't tell anybody, dies. And
Don't give away too much, right?
yeah, and so then they have to figure out why this is happening. So,
It sounds like incredible fun.
and Sal is having a good time, and there's a bunch of duck puns, and we've got the little sisters of the earth, who are the pseudo nuns who live at the monastery, who are allegedly in favor of ecology, but are really actually um, doing other things.
And how can people follow you on social media?
My socials, I'm on Facebook. It's all Claudia H. Long, so I can remember it. And so you can find me on Facebook, on Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, and I'm not on TikTok really, although I do have a handle on it, but I'm not on it. So all socials, Claudia H. Long, and my website, www.claudiahlong.com, because when you turn 70, you can only remember one handle.
I'm almost the same, pretty much. Yes, I use the same one all across the board, except for Facebook. But
Right.
that's good, Claudia. I want to thank you so much for coming on. It's been so much fun getting to speak with you today. And like I said, I love the title. I look forward to reading the entire series. Hopefully, there'll be many, many more to come.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Well, again, the book is it's Murder Without a Duck, and please make sure you go get it.
I'll put this in front of me. I'll put this in.
Yeah, put it up. I'm going to put the picture. There we go. I'm going to put the picture on.
Yeah, it's my screen's blurred, so it's kind of hard to see.
Well, again, this has been The Jewish Lens. I'm Jonathan Rosen. And again, a very special thanks to Claudia Long. And please like, comment, and subscribe.
Thanks for tuning in to The Jewish Lens, where all items used was strictly kosher.